The human brain is an organic supercomputer. For the average person, it filters out roughly 99% of all sensory input. The hum of a fluorescent light bulb, the precise variation in temperature from one side of a room to another, the microscopic twitch of a stranger's zygomaticus major muscle. These are discarded by the brain as useless noise to prevent insanity. Izuku Midoriya did not have a filter. When he was exactly 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days old, sitting on the crinkling paper of an examination table in a sterile clinic in Muzurifu, his filter dissolved. It did not happen with a bang, nor a flash of light. It happened in the span of a single, drawn-out exhalation. Dr. Tsubasa, a bald man with a bushy mustache and round spectacles, pointed a wooden pointer at a glowing X-ray of Izuku's left foot. "You should probably give it up," the doctor said. Izuku's mother, Inko, gasped. The sound registered in Izuku's ears at an exact decibel level of 62. He turned his head to look at her. At that exact millisecond, the world fractured into a kaleidoscope of infinite data. Izuku looked at his mother's face. He didn't just see sadness, he saw the biomechanics of human despair. He watched the capillaries in her sclera dilate as her blood pressure spiked. He heard the sudden, irregular arrhythmia of her heartbeat, jumping from a resting 72 beats per minute to 118. He saw the microscopic tremor in her lower lip, indicative of suppressed vocalization, likely a cry of denial. He smelled the sudden spike of cortisol and adrenaline in her sweat. Then, his gaze flicked to the doctor. Heart rate, steady. Posture, relaxed, leaning slightly back, hands in his pockets. A subconscious display of detachment. The doctor didn't care. To him, this was a routine diagnosis. A statistical normality. Izuku looked at the X-ray on the wall. He saw the 2 joints in the pinky toe. In an instant, his mind connected the visual data with a documentary he had watched 3 weeks prior regarding human evolutionary biology. Quirk individuals lack the extra joint, a streamlining of the human form to accommodate new genetic sequences. Izuku possessed the joint. He was an evolutionary baseline. A relic, quirkless. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. But Izuku wasn't suffocating. In fact, his mind was accelerating. Izuku, Inko whispered, reaching out to touch his shoulder. He looked at her hand. He calculated the trajectory, the speed, the kinetic force of her touch before it even made contact. When her hand landed, it was exactly as he had predicted. If I am quirkless, 4-year-old Izuku deduced in the span of 3 seconds, then I am a statistical minority comprising roughly 20% of the global population. However, adjusting for generational demographics, the percentage of quirkless individuals in my specific age bracket is closer to 0.2%. I am an anomaly. He looked down at his own small, pudgy hands. Society is built upon a hierarchy of genetic power. The presence of a meta-ability dictates social standing, economic mobility, and psychological confidence. Without a quirk, my baseline societal value will plummet to the bottom percentile. I will be targeted. I will be ostracized. The probability of severe bullying is 99.9%. Is there some mistake? Inko asked, her voice trembling. He's been playing hero every day. He wants it so badly. No mistake, Mrs. Midoriya, the doctor sighed, tapping his clipboard. The boy is quirkless. I suggest you help him find a more realistic dream. Izuku didn't cry. The emotional response of sorrow was immediately overridden by the sheer, crushing weight of analytical logic. Crying was an evolutionary mechanism designed to elicit sympathy and secure resources from caregivers. But crying would not alter his genetic code. Crying was inefficient. Instead, Izuku looked up at the ceiling. The fluorescent light hummed at a frequency of 60 Hz. The air conditioning blew at a velocity of 2.3 meters per second. The world was a vast, mathematical equation, and for the first time, Izuku could see the numbers. He had no quirk. But as the doctor noted on a secondary chart, completely missing the implications, the boy's brainwave activity during the scan had been off the charts. It wasn't a quirk, biologically speaking. It was an anomaly of neural density. His synapses were firing at a speed that defied human biology. Izuku Midoriya possessed an infinite capacity for processing information. And he realized, with terrifying clarity, that a world ruled by people shooting fire from their hands and turning into giant animals was a world ruled by children playing with sledgehammers. Raw power was chaotic. Raw power was flawed. Intelligence, however? Intelligence was a scalpel. 2 weeks later, the theoretical became reality. The playground at the local park was bathed in the warm, golden light of late afternoon. A gentle breeze swept through the oak trees, rustling leaves at a frequency Izuku had long since memorized. He was sitting on a bench, a notebook resting on his lap. It wasn't a hero analysis notebook anymore. It was a notebook filled with rudimentary, yet flawless, algebraic equations and physics theories he had extrapolated from reading a single high school textbook at the local library. "Stop it! You're hurting him!" The shout broke his concentration. Izuku blinked, recalibrating his focus from the macro-mechanics of orbital mechanics to the micro-environment of the sandbox. 10 meters away, Katsuki Bakugo stood over a weeping boy. 2 other lackeys flanked Bakugo, sneering. Bakugo's palms were popping with small, crackling explosions. The smell of burned sugar, nitroglycerin, drifted through the air. Katsuki Bakugo, Izuku's mind supplied instantly. Age 4. Quirk, explosion. Secretes nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms and ignites it at will. Psychological profile. Textbook narcissistic personality disorder fostered by constant, unearned praise from peers and authority figures. Highly aggressive. Insecure regarding his own superiority, requiring constant validation through the subjugation of others. Izuku sighed. It was a small, quiet sound. He closed his notebook and slid off the bench. He didn't run. Running would elevate his heart rate and cloud his cognitive functions. He walked at a steady, measured pace, calculating the optimal approach vector. He stepped between Bakugo and the crying boy. "Deku?" Bakugo sneered, his red eyes flashing with an infantile, predatory glee. The nickname had been coined a week ago when Izuku's quirkless status became public knowledge. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You don't have a quirk. You're just a useless Deku." Bakugo slammed a fist into his open palm. Pop boom. A small explosion flared. Izuku didn't flinch. His eyes tracked the flash of light. He noted the expansion of the gases, the heat signature, the slight recoil in Bakugo's shoulder. "Katsuki," Izuku said. His voice was flat, devoid of the usual childish treble. It was the voice of a judge reading a sentence. "Your quirk is undeniably powerful. Statistically speaking, it places you in the upper 98th percentile of offensive meta-abilities for our generation." Bakugo blinked, the big words momentarily short-circuiting his aggression. "Huh! What are you mumbling about, nerd? Get out of the way or I'll blow you up." "I am not moving," Izuku stated calmly. He looked directly into Bakugo's eyes. "Because you will not blow me up. If you use your quirk on me, an unarmed, quirkless individual, in a public park with exactly 4 civilian witnesses currently within visual range, the resultant police report will place a permanent black mark on your permanent record." Izuku took a single step forward. He was shorter than Bakugo, yet the atmosphere around him seemed to grow immensely heavy. "You want to be the number 1 hero, do you not?" Izuku continued, his tone clinical. UA High School, the premier institution for heroics, runs extensive background checks. A documented history of unprovoked, quirk-assisted assault on a defenseless peer will result in an automatic rejection. You would be relegated to a second-rate academy, forever living in the shadow of true elites. Bakugo's jaw dropped. The pop in his hands fizzled out. His lackey stepped back, suddenly looking nervous. "Furthermore," Izuku said, tilting his head slightly, analyzing the micro-expressions of panic flitting across Bakugo's face. "Your reliance on your quirk is a crutch. You lead with your right shoulder. You telegraph your attacks based on emotional volatility. Because everyone praises you, you have never had to develop actual combat strategy or emotional regulation. You operate purely on instinct and ego." Izuku took another step. He was now mere inches from Bakugo. "Your ego is fragile, Katsuki," Izuku whispered, his green eyes piercing into Bakugo's very soul. "You bully others not because you are strong, but because you are terrified that your quirk is the only valuable thing about you. You require my weakness to validate your strength." It is a pathetic, symbiotic relationship. And I am severing it. Silence descended upon the sandbox. Bakugo's breath hitched. His chest heaved. He looked down at his hands, then up at Izuku's unblinking, emerald eyes. There was no fear in Izuku. There was no anger. There was only an alien, terrifying comprehension. Izuku saw him. He saw every crack, every flaw, every childish insecurity. Tears welled up in Bakugo's eyes. His lip trembled. The illusion of his absolute superiority shattered under the weight of Izuku's absolute truth. Bakugo let out a frustrated, choked sob, turned on his heel, and ran. His lackeys, bewildered, chased after him. Izuku watched him go, calculating the speed of Bakugo's retreat. He felt a fleeting sensation in his chest, a pang of pity. He hadn't wanted to break the boy's mind, but conflict resolution dictated neutralizing the threat with maximum efficiency and minimum physical risk. Izuku turned to the crying boy on the ground. His quirk relies on sweat, Izuku said plainly. If he targets you again, spray him with a fire extinguisher or throw cold water on his hands. It lowers the temperature of his epidermis and washes away the nitroglycerin, rendering him temporarily quirkless. Leaving the stunned child in the dirt, Izuku walked back to his bench, picked up his notebook, and resumed his calculations on orbital mechanics. He was 4 years old. He had just defeated the strongest kid in town using nothing but words. The following years were a blur of accelerated accumulation. For a mind like Izuku's, the traditional schooling system was a localized form of torture. Sitting in a classroom, while a teacher slowly explained basic arithmetic, felt like watching paint dry in slow motion. He learned to camouflage himself. He maintained average grades, calculating exactly how many questions to purposefully get wrong on tests to avoid drawing the attention of government quirk researchers. He smiled when spoken to, though he calculated exactly which facial muscles to contract to mimic genuine joy. He loved his mother. Inko Midoriya was a kind, gentle woman. But Izuku quickly realized that his true nature terrified her. Once, at age 6, he had casually diagnosed a structural flaw in their apartment building's foundation based on a localized stress fracture in the drywall, suggesting they evacuate before a minor earthquake caused a localized collapse. He had been right. The building survived, but Inko had looked at him as if he were a ghost. From that day on, he played the part of the slightly nervous, quirkless boy who just really loved heroes. He bought All Might merchandise. He kept up the charade. It was the statistical optimum for maintaining domestic peace. But in the privacy of his bedroom, surrounded by locked doors and encrypted hard drives, Izuku Midoriya was becoming a god. The internet was his true domain. By age 7, he had mastered university-level physics, chemistry, structural engineering, and biomechanics. He possessed a photographic memory, but it was more than just recall. It was instantaneous synthesis. If he read a thesis on aerodynamic drag, he could immediately apply it to the optimal design of a hero's cape. If he read a medical journal on neurology, he could instantly map the exact pressure points on the human body that would induce unconsciousness. But a mind is useless if the body cannot execute its commands. Izuku knew his quirkless body was a limitation. He could not grow a tail, or breathe fire, or punch with the force of a nuclear bomb. Therefore, his body needed to become the perfect vessel for kinetic efficiency. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park had become an illegal dumping ground. For Izuku, it was a gold mine of raw materials and the perfect training facility. Every morning at 4 a.m., long before the sun rose, Izuku would run. He didn't just jog. He analyzed his own biomechanics. He adjusted his stride length to the millimeter to minimize energy loss. He calculated the exact angle of his foot strike to maximize elastic recoil from his Achilles tendon. When he returned to his room, he watched videos. He hacked into secure databases, pulling up footage of underground martial arts tournaments in Thailand, military CQC training in the United States, and historical texts on ancient grappling techniques. He didn't just watch them. He absorbed them. Standing in front of a full-length mirror, Izuku would play a video of a Muay Thai champion executing a roundhouse kick. Izuku's brain would analyze the movement, the torque of the hips, the pivot of the supporting foot, the trajectory of the shin, the exact millisecond of impact. Then, Izuku would move. His body, directed by an infallible neural network, would replicate the movement perfectly. Muscle memory is typically built through thousands of repetitions. Izuku built it in one. He downloaded fighting styles into his nervous system like software into a hard drive. Aikido for redirection of force. Krav Maga for lethal efficiency. Judo for leverage. Boxing for footwork. By age 10, he was a master of 6 distinct martial arts. He had never been in a real fight, but he didn't need to be. He had run millions of combat simulations in his mind, accounting for every variable, every quirk type, every environmental factor. Simultaneously, his engineering skills flourished. Dagobah Beach provided him with broken microwaves, rusted car engines, and discarded smartphones. Using a soldering iron and scavenged copper wire, Izuku began building his arsenal. His first invention was a sensory dampener. He realized early on that his infinite processing speed made him vulnerable to sensory overload. A sudden flash bang or a sonic blast could temporarily paralyze his cognitive functions if he wasn't prepared. He built a pair of sleek, innocuous-looking headphones that utilized active noise cancellation, calibrated to filter out harmful frequencies while amplifying ambient tactical data. His second invention was a kinetic redistribution mesh. Woven into a standard black undershirt, the mesh utilized non-Newtonian fluids and carbon nanotubes scavenged from a discarded hero support item. It could take the impact of a sledgehammer and disperse the kinetic energy across his entire torso, turning a lethal blow into a minor bruise. He was building the scalpel. Piece by piece. The true test of his abilities came on a rainy Tuesday evening when Izuku was 13. He was walking home from a hardware store, carrying a bag of high-grade neodymium magnets, when he decided to take a shortcut through an industrial alleyway. His situational awareness was absolute. He heard the footsteps 3 blocks away. He recognized the uneven cadence, someone injured, or drunk, or fleeing. Izuku paused beneath a flickering street lamp. He adjusted his umbrella, calculating the angle of the rain. A man burst out from a side alley. He was massive, easily 2 meters tall, with skin that looked like hardened concrete. A low-level villain, based on the prison tattoos visible on his neck and the stolen briefcase clutched in his massive hand. Sirens wailed in the distance. The villain saw Izuku, saw the small, unassuming teenager in a school uniform holding an umbrella, and made a tactical error. He lunged, intending to use Izuku as a hostage. "Get over here, kid!" The villain barked, his concrete hand reaching for Izuku's collar. Time dilated for Izuku. It didn't actually slow down. His brain simply processed the visual information so fast that the world appeared to crawl. Izuku mapped the villain's trajectory. Mass, approximately 140 kilograms. Velocity, 5 meters per second. Quirk, epidermal hardening, likely silica-based. Weaknesses, decreased joint flexibility, high center of gravity, compromised vision due to the rain and the hood he wore. Izuku didn't throw a punch. Punching solid concrete would shatter his own metacarpals. That was inefficient. Instead, Izuku performed a sequence of actions that took less than 1.2 seconds. First, he calculated the exact coefficient of friction of the wet pavement beneath the villain's boots. He noted a small puddle of leaked motor oil approximately 1 meter ahead of the villain's path. Second, Izuku stepped exactly 14 centimeters to his left, shifting his body out of the villain's direct line of attack. Third, he extended his right foot, tapping a discarded, hollow steel pipe resting on the ground. He applied precisely 40 newtons of force at a 30-degree angle. The pipe rolled smoothly across the wet asphalt, stopping perfectly in the center of the motor oil puddle. The villain, unable to alter his momentum, stepped squarely onto the steel pipe. Physics took over. The lack of friction from the oil, combined with the rolling cylinder and the villain's immense forward momentum, destroyed his center of gravity. His legs flew out from under him. But Izuku wasn't finished. As the villain fell forward, Izuku smoothly collapsed his umbrella and jammed the pointed metal tip directly into a specific cluster of nerves situated just beneath the villain's armpit, one of the few places where the skin was thin enough to bypass the concrete quirk. The villain roared in pain, his arm going instantly numb. He crashed face first into the brick wall of the alley with a sickening crunch, the sheer kinetic force of his own 140-kilogram body turning against him. He hit the ground unconscious. Izuku stood there, the rain falling around him. He hadn't broken a sweat. His heart rate was a steady 70 beats per minute. He calmly opened his umbrella, stepped over the unconscious concrete giant, and continued his walk home. Target neutralized, his mind noted clinically. Energy expended minimal. Efficiency, 100%. He pulled out his phone, dialed the police anonymously, and gave them the exact GPS coordinates before hanging up. He didn't stay for praise. Praise was an emotional construct. He cared only for results, which brought him to the present. Izuku Midoriya, age 14, stood on the edge of the roof of Aldera Junior High. The wind whipped his dark green hair around his face. Below him, the city of Muzutafu sprawled out like a massive, intricate circuit board. To anyone else, it was just a city. To Izuku, it was a living organism, and he could see its every pulse, its every flaw. He closed his eyes and brought up his mind palace, a purely mental HUD constructed of raw data and perfect memory. He didn't need to look at a screen. He had memorized the city grid, the police patrol routes, and the active hero rosters. Kamui Woods, Izuku thought. Currently patrolling the financial district. Excellent mobility, but heavily reliant on arboreal constructs. Vulnerable to incendiary quirks. Response time to Sector 4, 3.2 minutes. Empty lady. Patrolling the Central Plaza. High visibility, excellent for crowd control and PR, but catastrophic collateral damage rating in enclosed spaces. Inefficient for stealth or hostage extraction. Response time, 4.5 minutes. Death arms. Heavy lifter. Patrolling the industrial zone. Slow reaction time. Predictable linear attacks. Izuku opened his eyes. He looked down at the notebook in his hands. The cover no longer read Hero Analysis for the Future. He had scratched that out. The new title, written in sharp, precise characters, read, Heroes Society Overhaul, Volume 1. He flipped open the book. The pages were filled with blueprints, algorithmic predictions of villain emergence based on socioeconomic trends, and detailed psychological profiles of Japan's top 10 heroes. He stopped on a page dedicated to the symbol of peace. All Might. There was a sketch of the towering hero, but Izuku's notes were not those of a fanboy. Subject, All Might. Quirk, unclassified strength enhancer. Power output, immeasurable. Public morale rating, 99%. Flaw, Izuku had written in red ink. He is a single point of failure. A load-bearing pillar holding up an inherently unstable structure. If All Might falls, the psychological deterrent against villainy vanishes overnight. Crime rates will statistically spike by 300% within a month. The system relies entirely on a mortal man's invincibility. This is structurally unsound. Izuku closed the notebook. He leaned against the chain-link fence bordering the roof. The door to the roof banged open. Izuku didn't turn around. He had heard the heavy, aggressive footsteps ascending the stairs 2 minutes ago. He knew the gate. He knew the breathing pattern. Hey, Deku! Bakugo's voice snarled from behind him. It had been 10 years since the sandbox incident. In that time, Bakugo had grown taller, stronger, and meaner. His quirk had developed into a devastating weapon. But functionally, mentally, he hadn't changed. He still surrounded himself with sycophants. He still screamed to assert dominance. He still avoided looking Izuku directly in the eyes. Ever since that day at the park, Bakugo had kept his distance. He bullied others, but he rarely touched Izuku. There was a primal, subconscious terror ingrained in Bakugo whenever he looked at the quirkless boy. A feeling that he was standing before an apex predator masquerading as a sheep. Today, however, Bakugo seemed agitated. Izuku calculated the variables. Midterms were coming up. UA applications were due next week. Bakugo was stressed, requiring an outlet to vent his explosive tension. What are you doing up here, nerd? Bakugo demanded, striding forward, though he stopped a full 2 meters away. Plotting how to fail your exams? Izuku slowly turned around. He looked at Bakugo. He didn't see a childhood friend, nor did he see a terrifying bully. He saw a complex combination of muscle tissue, nervous system pathways, and psychological trauma. I am observing the traffic patterns of the Central Ward, Katsuki, Izuku said calmly. His voice was smooth, betraying zero emotion. There is a 14% inefficiency in the deployment of traffic officers during rush hour, leading to a localized increase in petty theft in the gridlocked areas. Bakugo scowled, small sparks popping in his palms. Shut up with your weird mumbling. I heard a rumor today. A stupid, impossible rumor. Rumors are statistically unreliable, Izuku noted. They said you applied for UA High School, Bakugo growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. The hero course. Izuku stared at him. That is correct. You don't have a quirk. Bakugo exploded, the sparks flaring into a small fireball. You're a useless Deku. You can't be a hero. I'm going to be the only one from this garbage middle school to make it to UA. I'm going to surpass All Might. You stepping into my spotlight. It pisses me off. Bakugo lunged, his right hand raised, a localized explosion ready to detonate against Izuku's notebook. Izuku didn't flinch. Time dilated. Attack vector, right oblique. Speed, 12 meters per second. Force, approximately 800 newtons, coupled with a localized thermal blast of 400 degrees Celsius. Izuku stepped a half-inch to his left. The explosion roared past his cheek, close enough for him to feel the heat, but entirely missing him. Before Bakugo could retract his arm, Izuku moved. His left hand shot up, his fingers clamping down on Bakugo's wrist with the precision of a vice. He didn't squeeze hard enough to break bone, but he applied exactly enough pressure to a specific nerve cluster, the median nerve. Bakugo let out a sharp gasp, his fingers involuntarily opening, the explosion dying instantly. His entire right arm went completely dead, hanging limp at his side. What did you do? Bakugo choked, his eyes widening in shock, trying to pull his arm back, but finding he had zero motor control over his triceps or flexors. Izuku didn't let go. He stepped into Bakugo's personal space. The height difference remained, but Izuku's presence was overwhelming. I applied pressure to your median nerve, inducing a temporary state of neuropraxia, Izuku explained, his voice chillingly calm. Your arm will regain function in approximately 3 minutes. If I had shifted my thumb 2 centimeters to the right and applied 20 pounds more pressure, I would have permanently severed the nerve sheath, rendering your arm entirely paralyzed for the rest of your life. Your quirk requires an intact nervous system to trigger the sweat gland ignition. I could take your quirk away, Katsuki. With 2 fingers, Bakugo's face drained of color. He was trembling. The primal fear from a decade ago came rushing back, crashing over him like a tidal wave. This wasn't a quirk. This was something far, far worse. You speak of spotlights and surpassing All Might, Izuku continued, releasing Bakugo's wrist. Bakugo stumbled backward, clutching his dead arm. You view heroics as a competition of raw power, a gladiatorial arena where the loudest explosion wins. Izuku turned his back on Bakugo, looking back out over the city. That mentality is obsolete. The villains of the future will not be mindless thugs you can blast away with sheer force. They will be organized. They will be intelligent. They will adapt to the sledgehammer. Izuku picked up his notebook and slipped it into his yellow backpack. He walked past the terrified, paralyzed Bakugo, pausing just at the door to the stairwell. I am not applying to UA to compete with you, Katsuki. I am applying because the structural integrity of this society is failing. And it requires a surgeon to fix it. Izuku opened the door and descended into the shadows of the stairwell, leaving Bakugo alone on the roof, shivering in the wind, staring at his paralyzed hand in absolute, unadulterated horror. Izuku walked down the stairs, his mind already moving past the encounter. Bakugo was a known variable. He was insignificant to the grand equation. Instead, Izuku focused on his schedule for the evening. He had to complete the microservos for his exoskeleton's knee joints, review the metallurgy of his grappling wire, and analyze the patrol routes for an underground hero operating in the red light district. 10 months until the UA entrance exam. 10 months until the world witnessed the true power of an infinite mind. Izuku Midoriya smiled. It wasn't a hero's booming grin, nor a villain's psychotic smirk. It was the quiet, terrifying smile of a chess grandmaster who had just looked at the board and realized he had forced mate in 70 moves. The game was already over. They just didn't know it yet. The human mind, under standard operating conditions, perceives time as a constant, linear progression. 1 second follows another, unyielding and uniform. For Izuku Midoriya, time was not a stream. It was an ocean he could dive into, freeze, and dissect at will. It was 3:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. The ambient temperature was 22.4 degrees Celsius. The humidity stood at 64%, creating a slight atmospheric drag that Izuku factored into his walking pace. The wind was blowing from the north-northwest at approximately 4.2 meters per second. He was walking away from Aldera Junior High, his yellow backpack slung over one shoulder, his mind simultaneously processing 3 separate streams of thought. Stream 1. The structural redesign of his kinetic redistribution mesh, specifically substituting Kevlar for a carbon nanotube weave to increase flexibility by 14%. Stream 2. Compiling a statistical analysis of localized crime rates in Muzurifu to predict the patrol route of the underground hero Eraserhead. Stream 3. Dissecting the psychological aftereffects of his earlier confrontation with Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki's superiority complex is tethered entirely to his physical dominance, Izuku mused, his emerald eyes tracking the fractal patterns of cracks in the concrete sidewalk. By neutralizing his quirk with a simple nerve block, I triggered a cognitive dissonance. He is currently oscillating between denial and extreme paranoia. Predictable, but suboptimal. A cornered animal is erratic. A low rumble interrupted his thoughts. Izuku stopped. To the pedestrians around him, it was just a faint vibration. To Izuku, it was a data point. He closed his eyes. He calculated the time delay between the seismic tremor traveling through the concrete and the arrival of the acoustic shockwave. 0.8 seconds. Assuming the sound traveled at roughly 343 meters per second in the current humidity, the epicenter of the explosion was approximately 274 meters away. Direction: 45 degrees to his right. The Tatooine shopping district. A second explosion echoed, followed by a plume of black, acrid smoke rising above the skyline. Izuku inhaled sharply, identifying the chemical signature of the smoke. It wasn't a standard gas line rupture. He smelled burning ozone, melting asphalt, and the distinct, saccharine odor of combusting nitroglycerin. Katsuki? Izuku did not run blindly. He opened his eyes, immediately mapping out a three-dimensional grid of the city in his mind. He identified the shortest route to the epicenter, factoring in crowd density, alleyway widths, and potential structural hazards from the ongoing explosions. He moved. His pace was a calculated, energy-efficient sprint. He utilized a parkour technique, a precision vault over a retaining wall, a calculated wall run to bypass a congested crosswalk, arriving at the edge of the Tatooine shopping district in exactly 41.3 seconds. The scene was pure, unadulterated chaos. A crowd of onlookers had formed a loose perimeter, held back by the heat and the shouting of local pro-heroes. Izuku slipped through the gaps in the crowd with frictionless ease, analyzing the situation in milliseconds. In the center of the street was a massive, undulating mass of dark green sludge. It possessed no rigid skeletal structure, operating as an amorphous, semi-fluid entity. Trapped within its mass was Katsuki Bakugo. The blond boy was thrashing violently, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and terror, desperately firing off explosions from his palms. Izuku's eyes swept the perimeter. Pro-hero Death Arms. Quirk, Enhanced Strength. Current status, Ineffective. He relies on kinetic strikes and grappling. You cannot grapple a liquid. Pro-hero, Kamui Woods. Quirk Arbor. Current status, Ineffective. Wood is highly combustible. Katsuki's explosions have ignited the surrounding buildings, creating an ambient temperature of roughly 400 degrees Celsius in the immediate vicinity. Kamui Woods cannot approach without severe risk of self-ignition. Pro-hero, MT Lady. Quirk, Gigantification. Current status, Ineffective. The commercial street is precisely 12 meters wide. Her gigantified form requires a minimum operational width of 15 meters. Attempting to intervene would result in catastrophic structural damage to the surrounding civilian infrastructure. It's no good. Death Arms shouted, coughing on the smoke. None of us have the right quirks for this. We have to wait for someone with a favorable matchup. Izuku stared at the pro-heroes. He didn't feel anger, exactly. Anger was a secondary emotional response. What he felt was a profound, clinical disgust. Favorable matchup? Izuku's mind raced, processing thousands of variables a second. They are operating under the parameters of video game logic. They view their quirks as their only tools. They have entirely discounted physics, chemistry, and environmental exploitation. Izuku shifted his focus back to the sludge villain. Biological analysis. The entity is a colloidal suspension, likely a non-Newtonian fluid. It thickens upon kinetic impact, which is why death arms could not penetrate it. However, it must possess a centralized nervous system, or a core to maintain consciousness. Katsuki's explosions are currently having a detrimental effect. The heat is evaporating the water content within the sludge, increasing its viscosity and making it harder for Katsuki to breathe. If he continues, he will asphyxiate in exactly 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Izuku did not yell. He did not charge forward with a tearful scream about saving his friend. Heroics fueled by adrenaline was a coin toss. Izuku only dealt in absolute certainties. He turned his head. Exactly 12 meters to his left, untouched by the flames, was a small, brightly lit convenience store. A 7-Eleven. Izuku walked away from the crowd. He stepped through the sliding glass doors of the 7-Eleven. The chime rang out, a surreal, cheerful sound in the midst of the chaos. The cashier was cowering behind the counter, clutching a baseball bat. We're closed. Get out, kid! The cashier stammered. Izuku ignored him. His eyes darted across the aisles, his brain instantly indexing the inventory, cataloging chemical compositions and packaging materials. He moved down the aisles with terrifying precision, a blur of motion. Aisle 3, hardware and cleaning. Izuku grabbed 3 cans of compressed aerosol keyboard cleaner, active ingredient, difluoroethane. Aisle 5, first aid and pharmacy. He grabbed 5 instant cold packs, contents, water pouch and ammonium nitrate pellets. Aisle 1, general goods. A roll of heavy-duty duct tape. A 2-liter bottle of generic cola. A barbecue lighter with a long nozzle. He returned to the counter, dumping the items onto the scanner. He pulled a pristine, high-limit credit card from his wallet, funded entirely by a minor algorithmic day trading program he had written at age 11 that skimmed fractions of pennies off international stock exchanges. I need these, Izuku said calmly. I will also be utilizing your floor space for exactly 20 seconds. Please remain behind the counter for your own safety. Before the cashier could respond, Izuku went to work. He unscrewed the 2-liter cola bottle and dumped the liquid onto the floor. He drew a small, collapsible tactical knife from his pocket and cleanly sliced open the 5 instant cold packs. He poured the raw ammonium nitrate pellets into the empty plastic bottle. Next, he took the cans of compressed keyboard cleaner. Difluoroethane has a boiling point of -25 degrees Celsius. Under pressure, it remains a liquid, but upon release, it rapidly expands into a freezing gas. However, if the can itself is ruptured while submerged in a secondary endothermic agent, the sudden expansion and chemical reaction create an extreme, localized flash freeze effect. Izuku pierced the safety valves of the 3 aerosol cans, immediately shoving them into the 2-liter bottle alongside the ammonium nitrate. He poured a small amount of the cold pack water in to begin the endothermic reaction, rapidly dropping the internal temperature. He sealed the bottle tightly, then wrapped the entire construct in 3 layers of heavy-duty duct tape to artificially increase the pressure threshold of the plastic. Finally, he taped the barbecue lighter securely to the side of the bottle, bending the nozzle so the flame would sit directly over a structurally weakened seam he had scored with his knife. Total construction time, 18.4 seconds. He had just built a highly pressurized, localized endothermic bomb. Izuku stepped out of the convenience store. The situation had deteriorated. Bakugo's explosions were growing weaker. His eyes were rolling back into his head. The sludge villain was laughing, a horrific, gurgling sound. Just a little longer, kid! The villain mocked. You make a great skin suit. Izuku stepped past the police barricade. Hey! Kid! Get back here! Are you crazy? Death Arms roared, reaching out to grab Izuku's shoulder. Izuku didn't even look at him. He sidestepped the hero's massive hand with a micro-movement, slipping past Death Arm's guard as if the hero were moving in slow motion. Izuku walked to the exact center of the street, stopping precisely 8 meters from the sludge villain. "Let him go," Izuku said. His voice was not loud, but its chilling absolute certainty cut through the roar of the flames. The sludge villain paused, a massive, watery eye swiveling down to look at the green-haired boy. "Huh! Another hero wannabe? Buzz off, brat, before I eat you too." Izuku didn't blink. He raised the heavily taped bottle in his right hand. His mind calculated the wind shear from the fires, the exact viscosity of the sludge encasing Bakugo, and the optimal trajectory to avoid collateral damage to the hostage. "Your biological makeup relies on remaining in a fluid state," Izuku stated, his voice ringing out across the quieted street. "At a localized temperature of -40 degrees Celsius, your cellular structure will undergo rapid crystallization. You will become brittle. You will become fragile." "What the hell are you mumbling about?" the villain roared, raising a massive tendril of sludge like a whip. Izuku clicked the barbecue lighter. A small flame flickered to life, directly heating the weakened seam of the pressurized bottle. The defluoroethane inside was already boiling, expanding violently against the duct tape. Izuku threw the bottle. It wasn't a desperate, wild pitch. It was a throw executed with the flawless biomechanics of an Olympic pitcher, mathematically calculated to the millimeter. The bottle arced through the air, perfectly bisecting the heat waves of the surrounding fires. The sludge villain sneered, opening a massive, gaping maw to swat the projectile away. That was exactly what Izuku had predicted. The bottle flew directly into the center of the villain's gelatinous mass, sinking into the sludge right next to Bakugo's chest. "Ha! Is that your quirk? Throwing garbage?" The villain laughed. Izuku adjusted his tie. "No. That is thermodynamics." 3, 2, 1. Inside the villain, the heat of the lighter compromised the weakened plastic. The bottle ruptured. The 3 compromised aerosol cans inside detonated simultaneously, their pressurized liquid rapidly expanding into gas. This expansion forcefully mixed with the ammonium nitrate and water, triggering a massive, instantaneous endothermic reaction. It did not explode with fire. It exploded with ice. A violent shockwave of absolute zero tore outward from the center of the villain. The air itself crystallized, a crackling sound echoing like shattering glass. The sludge, previously a thick, suffocating liquid, froze instantaneously. The dark green mass turned into a pale, frosty white, halting mid-movement like a grotesque statue. Bakugo, caught in the very edge of the blast radius, was left untouched by the freezing chemical, but the sludge encasing him shattered like cheap porcelain, crumbling away into frozen chunks. Bakugo fell forward, gasping violently for air, hitting the pavement on his hands and knees. The street was utterly silent, save for the crackling of the dying fires and the soft clinking of frozen sludge hitting the asphalt. Izuku walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. He stopped in front of the frozen, completely immobilized villain. He looked down at Bakugo. "Your reliance on localized combustion in an enclosed, oxygen-deprived environment was statistically guaranteed to result in your own asphyxiation," Izuku said clinically. "You must learn to moderate your quirk usage based on atmospheric variables." Bakugo coughed up a lungful of smoke, his red eyes wide, staring at Izuku in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. "Deku, what did you—" Before Izuku could respond, the spell broke. The pro-heroes snapped out of their stupor and rushed forward. Kamui Woods quickly bound the frozen chunks of the villain. Death Arms hauled Bakugo to his feet, checking him for injuries. Then Death Arms turned his sights on Izuku. The hero's face was red with anger, entirely missing the point of what had just occurred. "What were you thinking, kid?" Death Arms bellowed, pointing a massive, accusatory finger at Izuku's chest. "You could have gotten yourself killed. That was incredibly reckless. Leave the hero work to the professionals." Kamui Woods nodded solemnly. "You put yourself and the hostage in greater danger. You cannot act as a vigilante." Izuku slowly turned his gaze to Death Arms. His emerald eyes were devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a supercomputer analyzing a faulty line of code. "Reckless?" Izuku repeated, the word tasting foul in his mouth. "Yes. You rushed in without a quirk or a plan." Death Arms scolded. Izuku's posture didn't change, but the atmosphere around him plummeted in temperature, matching the frozen sludge on the ground. "Let us review the empirical data of your so-called professional intervention," Izuku said, his voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. He didn't raise his voice, yet every word carried an oppressive, crushing weight. Izuku pointed at Death Arms. "You operate on kinetic force. You struck a non-Newtonian fluid 4 times, failing to realize that kinetic impact exponentially increases its resistance. By doing so, you agitated the villain and caused him to constrict the hostage further." Death Arms blinked, stepping back slightly, taken aback by the teenager's clinical onslaught. I was trying to. "You were trying to use a hammer on a puddle," Izuku interrupted. He turned to Kamui Woods. "You, an arbor-based hero, stood paralyzed on the sidelines because the ambient temperature exceeded the combustion threshold of your quirk. Instead of using your branches to pull civilians away or create a firebreak, you did nothing. You waited for a favorable matchup." Izuku finally looked at Empty Lady, who was shrinking back down to her normal size, looking embarrassed. "And you are functionally useless in any urban environment with a street width of less than 15 meters, rendering you a liability in 74% of Mizurufu's districts." The pro-heroes were silent. A crowd of reporters had gathered, their cameras rolling, capturing the unprecedented sight of a middle schooler systematically deconstructing 3 licensed heroes. "You did not have a plan," Izuku stated, his voice ringing with absolute, mathematical certainty. "You had a hostage situation deteriorating at a rate of 5% per minute. Katsuki Bakugo would have suffered irreversible brain damage from hypoxia in exactly 42 seconds had I not intervened. My actions were not reckless. They were calculated. I utilized basic chemistry to achieve a 100% success rate with 0 civilian casualties and 0 structural damage to the surrounding infrastructure." Izuku turned his back on them, adjusting the straps of his yellow backpack. "Do not project your tactical incompetence onto me," Izuku finished quietly. "It is mathematically embarrassing." With that, Izuku walked away. The crowd parted for him instinctively, sensing the predatory intellect radiating from the boy. No one tried to stop him. No police officer asked for his statement. They were too stunned, too dismantled by the brutal, undeniable truth of his logic. As Izuku walked away, a colossal figure standing in the shadows of an alleyway watched him go. The man was practically vibrating with a mixture of shock, awe, and a deep, profound curiosity. Izuku was 3 blocks away, his mind already returning to the structural design of his kinetic mesh, when he heard it. It was a massive displacement of air, traveling at approximately 120 kilometers per hour. A heavy impact followed, cracking the concrete in the alleyway just ahead of him. "I am here!" A booming, larger-than-life voice echoed off the brick walls. Izuku stopped. He didn't flinch. He slowly looked up. Standing before him, striking a heroic pose that blocked out the late afternoon sun, was All Might. The symbol of peace. Number 1 hero. "Young man!" All Might boomed, his signature smile plastered across his chiseled face. "I saw what you did back there. It was dangerous, yes. But also incredibly resourceful. I had to come and thank you personally for." Izuku held up a hand. A single, raised finger. It was such a profoundly dismissive gesture, executed with such utter confidence, that All Might actually stopped talking, blinking in surprise. "Your public persona is maintained through an elaborate projection of invulnerability," Izuku said, his eyes scanning All Might from head to toe. "However, your current biometrics tell a vastly different narrative." All Might's smile twitched. What are you talking about, my boy?" "I am the symbol of. Your respiratory rate is currently elevated to 28 breaths per minute, which is statistically impossible for a man of your purported stamina unless there is significant pulmonary compromise," Izuku rattled off, his eyes darting across All Might's chest. "Furthermore, you are subconsciously favoring your left side. Your center of gravity is shifted exactly 4.2 centimeters to the right to compensate for a massive loss of internal mass on your left flank." All Might froze. The booming confidence vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp panic. "How does he?" "Based on the faint, irregular protrusion visible through the spandex of your costume on your left side, extending from the bottom of your ribcage to your pelvic bone, you have undergone extensive, traumatic surgery," Izuku continued mercilessly. Given the timeline of your public appearances, you suffered a catastrophic drop in public activity precisely 5 years ago. The media attributed it to a well-deserved vacation and administrative restructuring. However, Izuku took a step forward, looking directly into All Might's shadowed blue eyes. Toxic Chainsaw, the villain you fought during that period, lacks the destructive capability to inflict such an injury. His quirk relies on localized lacerations, not blunt force or energy projection capable of destroying internal organs. Therefore, 5 years ago, you fought an unrecorded entity, suffering an injury that destroyed your respiratory system and likely your stomach, limiting your active hero work. Izuku paused, calculating the steam that was beginning to rise from All Might's body. And based on the rapid cellular degeneration I am currently observing, your time limit in this muscle form is approximately 3 hours a day. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence descended upon the alleyway. All Might stood entirely paralyzed. He had guarded this secret with his life. Sir Naitai, Recovery Girl, Detective Tsukachi, and Principal Nizu were the only people on the planet who knew the truth. And a 14-year-old boy in a middle school uniform had just deduced it in 60 seconds just by looking at him. Poof! A massive cloud of steam erupted from All Might's body. When the smoke cleared, the towering, muscular god was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man, swimming in baggy clothes, coughing up a small splatter of blood onto the pavement. Izuku didn't gasp. He didn't scream. He simply pulled a sterile tissue from his pocket and offered it to the skeletal man. Toshinori Yagi took the tissue with trembling hands, wiping the blood from his mouth. He looked at the boy with a mixture of absolute terror and profound reverence. Who are you? Toshinori rasped, his sunken eyes wide. Are you with him? I am Izuku Midoriya. I am a student at Aldera Junior High, Izuku replied calmly. And I assure you, I am not affiliated with whatever nemesis inflicted that wound upon you. My conclusions are based solely on empirical observation and statistical deduction. Toshinori leaned against the brick wall, sliding down slightly as his weakened legs trembled. You deduced all of that, just by looking at me? Yes. Toshinori let out a long, shaky breath. Kid, you have a terrifying intellect. Your quirk. I do not have a quirk, Izuku corrected smoothly. I am a genetic baseline. Biologically quirkless. My brain simply lacks the standard filters that restrict human cognitive processing. I perceive the universe as a series of interconnected data points. Toshinori stared at him. Quirkless. The boy who had humiliated 3 pro-heroes, saved a hostage, and deduced the greatest state secret in the world was quirkless. Suddenly, Toshinori threw his head back and laughed. It was a weak, wheezing laugh, but it was genuine. Quirkless. Of course. The universe has a cruel sense of humor. He looked back at Izuku, his gaze sharpening. Young Midoriya. What you did today, you proved that a hero is not defined by the quirk they possess, but by the action they take. You acted when licensed professionals froze. Toshinori pushed himself off the wall, standing as tall as his emaciated frame would allow. He looked at Izuku with a solemn, burning intensity. I came looking for you because I have been searching for a successor. Someone to inherit my power. Izuku's eyes narrowed infinitesimally. Inherit? Quirks are genetic anomalies, intrinsically tied to an individual's DNA. They cannot be transferred unless... Izuku's mind raced, connecting 1,000 disparate data points. The inconsistencies in All Might's public power level over the decades. The rumors of heroes from past eras possessing similar strength. The very nature of quirks themselves. Unless your quirk is a composite, Izuku breathed, his processing speed accelerating. A meta-ability that stockpiles power, but also possesses the unique attribute of being passed from one vessel to another. A torch passed down through generations. Toshinori's jaw dropped. He actually slapped a hand over his own face. Stop it. Just stop. You're giving me a headache. Yes. Yes, exactly that. Toshinori lowered his hand, his expression entirely serious. It is called One for All. I am the 8th holder of this power. And I want you, Izuku Midoriya, to be the 9th. With your intellect and my power, you could become the greatest hero this world has ever seen. Izuku stared at the skeletal man. To any other quirkless boy, this was a dream come true. This was the ultimate wish fulfillment. The number one hero offering the ultimate power on a silver platter. Izuku's mind, however, did not process dreams. It processed probabilities, efficiencies, and risk assessments. Izuku looked at Toshinori. He looked at the catastrophic injury that had ruined the man's body. He calculated the exponential growth of a stockpiling quirk over 8 generations, and the sheer biological toll it would take on a quirkless, unadapted 14-year-old vessel. No, Izuku said softly. Toshinori blinked. I'm sorry, what? I respectfully decline your offer, All Might, Izuku stated, his voice calm yet resolute. Toshinori was utterly flabbergasted. But why? You stepped in to save that boy today. You have the heart of a hero. With one for all I could what? Izuku interrupted smoothly. Punch things harder? Toshinori bristled slightly. It is the power to save millions. It is a sledgehammer, Izuku corrected, his emerald eyes flashing with a cold, terrifying brilliance. Your quirk, one for all, relies on overwhelming physical trauma to neutralize threats. It is a blunt instrument. And as I observed today, blunt instruments are mathematically inefficient in a complex, evolving society. Izuku stepped closer to Toshinori. You are a load-bearing pillar, All Might, Izuku explained, his tone shifting into a clinical lecture. Your strength is so absolute that you have inadvertently stunted the intellectual and tactical growth of the entire hero society. The pros today do not think. They rely on power because they are trying to mimic you. When your body finally fails, and based on your cellular degradation, you have less than a year of operational efficiency remaining, society will collapse because it only knows how to revere the sledgehammer. Toshinori looked down at his own skeletal hands. The boy's words cut deeper than any villain's blade, because Toshinori knew, deep down, that the boy was absolutely correct. I am not interested in becoming another sledgehammer, Izuku said quietly. If I accept your quirk now, my mind will be forced to spend invaluable cognitive resources regulating the sheer kinetic output of an exponentially stockpiled meta-ability. It would distract me from my true purpose. Which is? Toshinori asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. Building a scalpel, Izuku answered. I am going to dismantle the societal structures that create villains in the first place. I am going to optimize hero deployment, reconstruct support gear technology, and implement tactical algorithms that guarantee a 100% success rate. I will be a hero of intellect, not of brute force. Toshinori stared at the boy. For the first time in his life, Toshinori Yagi felt truly, utterly outmatched. Not in strength, but in sheer, visionary scope. The boy didn't just want to save people, he wanted to fix the entire world's operating system. However, Izuku continued, his tone softening just a fraction, registering the profound sadness in Toshinori's eyes. I recognize that until my systems are in place, your physical presence is a necessary psychological deterrent. Your death or retirement would trigger a localized societal collapse. Izuku reached into his backpack and pulled out a sleek, black business card. He had printed them himself. He handed it to the stunned number one hero. I will not take your quirk, All Might. But I will offer you my services. Toshinori looked at the card. It was blank, save for a single phone number and an encrypted email address. You are dying, Izuku said clinically. Your patrol routes are inefficient. Your combat engagements cause unnecessary collateral damage. If you hire me as your personal strategist and tactical analyst, I calculate that I can extend your operational lifespan by approximately 47%, while simultaneously increasing your efficiency and minimizing your physical exertion. Toshinori looked up from the card. You want to be my tactician? I want to ensure the pillar doesn't crumble before I have finished building the new foundation, Izuku clarified. Consider it an apprenticeship. You will teach me the inner workings of Hero Society's upper echelon. In exchange, I will manage your deployment, analyze your enemies, and keep you alive. Izuku turned away, looking down the alleyway toward the bustling street. Do we have a deal, Toshinori Yagi? All Might, the symbol of peace, the man who had stood atop the world for decades, looked at the 14-year-old boy in the middle school uniform. He felt a shiver run down his spine, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he first faced All for One. But this wasn't fear of malice. It was the awe of standing before something entirely, incomprehensibly new. Toshinori carefully placed the business card into his pocket. "We have a deal, young Midoriya." Izuku nodded once, adjusting his backpack. "Excellent. I will text you your optimized patrol route for tomorrow morning. Do not eat breakfast before 8 a.m. It strains your remaining gastrointestinal tract. Good evening." Without another word, Izuku walked out of the alleyway, merging seamlessly into the flow of pedestrian traffic, disappearing into the city he was already mathematically dissecting. Toshinori Yagi stood in the shadows, letting out a long, exhausted breath. He looked up at the sky. Nana, he thought, a weak smile pulling at his lips. "I didn't find a successor for our quirk today. But I think I just found the boy who is going to save the world anyway." For 10 months, Toshinori Yagi experienced what it was like to be an instrument played by a virtuoso. Before Izuku Midoriya, All Might's patrols had been reactive. He would leap across the city, relying on his superhuman senses to detect crime, crashing down like a meteor to save the day. It was inspiring, but it was also grossly inefficient. Under Izuku's direction, the symbol of peace became a surgical strike. Through a secure, encrypted earpiece, a 14-year-old boy sitting in a dark bedroom would feed the number one hero a continuous stream of optimized data. Izuku had algorithms running 24 hours a day, predicting crime hotspots based on socioeconomic fluctuations, traffic patterns, and weather anomalies. Take the next left, All Might. 3 blocks down, a bank robbery is currently in the planning stages. Apprehend the suspects in the alleyway before they enter the building. It eliminates the hostage variable and reduces structural damage to 0. Time saved 14 minutes. Adjust your trajectory by 12 degrees, Toshinori. You are wasting 4.2% of your kinetic energy fighting the headwind. If you utilize the updraft from the financial district's skyscrapers, you can extend your glide, preserving your remaining muscle form time by an estimated 12 seconds. Over 10 months, All Might's efficiency increased by a staggering 68%. His time limit, previously rapidly degrading, actually stabilized. He spent less time fighting and more time resolving conflicts before they even began. Toshinori was in awe. The boy didn't just understand heroism, he understood the very mathematical fabric of society. But while Izuku was directing a god, he was also building himself. The human body is an amazing machine, but it is bound by the limits of biology. Tendons snap. Bones fracture. Lactic acid builds up in the muscles. Izuku knew that to survive the UA entrance exam without a quirk, he needed to bridge the gap between human baseline and superhuman output. He did not build a clunky, Iron Man-style suit of armor. That would draw too much attention, and UA regulations regarding support gear for the entrance exam were stringent. If he brought an overt weapon, he would be disqualified. He had to build something that could be classified as medical or mobility assistance, hiding it in plain sight. In the dim light of his bedroom, on the night before the exam, Izuku finalized the calibration of Project Atlas. Atlas was an undersuit exoskeleton. It was constructed of scavenged carbon nanotube weave, reinforced with lightweight titanium alloy struts running along the spine, femurs, and forearms. But the true genius lay in the articulation. Izuku had utilized pneumatic microactuators filled with a pressurized, synthetic hydraulic fluid. The suit did not use a joystick or a neural link. It used surface electromyography, SEMG, sensors pressed directly against Izuku's skin. The moment Izuku's brain sent an electrical signal to his bicep to contract, the sensors read the microvoltage, and the suit's actuators moved in perfect synchronization. It didn't give him the power to lift a car, but it doubled his natural kinetic output, entirely negated recoil shock, and allowed his body to move at the exact speed his hyper-accelerated mind dictated without tearing his own muscles off the bone. Izuku slipped the sleek, matte black harness over his shoulders. It clicked into place, tightening around his torso and legs. He pulled a standard, baggy green Yui tracksuit over it. The thick fabric completely obscured the mechanical struts. He looked in the mirror. He looked like an ordinary, slightly scrawny 14-year-old boy. He clenched his fist. The SEMG sensors engaged. The microactuators hissed silently. He calculated the output, 250% baseline grip strength. Latency, 0.001 seconds. Optimal, Izuku whispered. The morning of the UA entrance exam was crisp and clear. The towering, H-shaped glass structure of UA High School gleamed in the sunlight, casting long, imposing shadows over the thousands of applicants swarming the front gates. Izuku walked through the crowd with measured, perfectly calculated steps. His mind was an open radar, passively processing the quirks of everyone around him. Applicant 3 meters ahead. Elongated cranium, likely a minor telekinetic or hyperintelligence quirk. Applicant to the left, acid secretion from the epidermis. Applicant to the right, localized gravity manipulation. Out of my way, a familiar, gravelly voice barked from behind. Izuku didn't turn around. He calculated the distance, the stride length, and the volume of the voice. Katsuki Bakugo. Ever since the incident on the school roof, Bakugo had maintained a wide berth. The explosive teenager had convinced himself that Izuku's trick was just a fluke, a lucky martial arts move. Yet, the subconscious terror remained. Bakugo stomped past Izuku, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. For a brief second, their eyes met. Bakugo's red eyes flared with a mixture of defiance and a deeply buried, instinctual fear. Izuku simply blinked, his emerald eyes coldly dissecting Bakugo's elevated heart rate and tense posture. Bakugo swallowed hard, looked away, and quickened his pace, practically fleeing toward the entrance. Izuku resumed his walk. As he approached the main courtyard, a girl with a brown bob tripped over a slightly uneven paving stone. Izuku's mind mapped the event instantly. Subject female. Mass, approximate, 50 kilograms. Trajectory, forward descent at a 45-degree angle. Estimated time to impact, 1.2 seconds. Izuku could have reached out and grabbed her arm, but that risked dislocating her shoulder or awkwardly shifting her center of mass. Instead, he stepped into her path, utilizing a Krav Maga footwork technique. He placed the side of his right sneaker precisely beneath the toe of her fallen shoe, acting as a wedge to alter her momentum, while simultaneously raising his left hand flat against her sternum, applying exactly 20 newtons of resistive force to halt her upper body without bruising her. The girl gasped, freezing midair, perfectly balanced on Izuku's foot and hand. "Whoa!" she breathed, her eyes wide. She looked at Izuku, who smoothly withdrew his support, allowing her to stand upright. "That was... How did you catch me so fast? I was about to use my quirk to make myself float, but I usually get super nauseous when I do that." Izuku analyzed her features. The pads on her fingertips were distinct, fleshy, pink nodes. "Zero gravity manipulation," Izuku stated flatly. "Your quirk nullifies the gravitational pull on objects you touch. However, the human inner ear relies on gravity to maintain equilibrium. By removing gravity from your own body, the fluid in your vestibular system floats freely, sending contradictory signals to your brain, resulting in severe motion sickness and emesis." Achiko Uraraka stared at him, her mouth hanging open in a perfect O. Yeah? Exactly that. I throw up. I suggest keeping ginger root supplements in your support gear, Izuku advised calmly. The gingerols and shogales act on the serotonin receptors in your digestive tract, significantly mitigating the nausea. Without waiting for a response or a thank you, Izuku adjusted his backpack and walked into the building, leaving a very bewildered, blushing Uraraka standing in the courtyard. The first phase of the exam was the written test. For the average applicant, it was a grueling 2-hour gauntlet of advanced calculus, hero law, physics, and applied ethics. For Izuku, it was an insult to his intelligence. He finished the exam in 12 minutes and 14 seconds. He spent the next hour sitting perfectly still, reviewing the test purely out of boredom. Upon his third mental pass, he noticed a discrepancy in question 42, which dealt with the terminal velocity of a falling object with a variable air resistance coefficient. The question assumed a constant air density, failing to account for the barometric pressure changes at different altitudes as dictated by the standard atmospheric model. Izuku neatly crossed out the provided multiple-choice answers, wrote down the mathematically correct answer in the margins, and provided a brief, 2-paragraph proof detailing why the UA faculty's question was structurally flawed. He flipped his paper over and waited for the bell. The auditorium was massive, packed with thousands of nervous applicants. The lights dimmed, and the voice hero, Present Mike, stepped onto the stage, throwing his hands into the air. Welcome to my live show, everybody. Can I get a yeah? Silence. Izuku winced internally. Auditory assault. Megaphone quirk. Highly effective for crowd control and disorientation, but tactically flawed in stealth scenarios. The silence in the room is a predictable psychological response to forced, unearned intimacy from an authority figure. Present Mike coughed into his hand. Tough crowd. All right, listeners, here's the rundown of the practical exam. A massive screen illuminated behind him, displaying a map of various mock cities, labeled A through G. Present Mike explained the points system. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers. 3 types of robotic villains worth varying amounts of points. Excuse me. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with blue hair and glasses stood up perfectly straight, his arm raised like a rigid flagpole. Tenya Ida, you stated there were 3 types of villains. However, the printout clearly displays 4. If this is a misprint, then UA, the premier hero academy in Japan, should be ashamed of such a glaring error. Furthermore, Ida turned, pointing an accusing finger directly at a boy 2 rows ahead of him. You, with the curly green hair, you have been sitting completely motionless, staring blankly ahead for the last 10 minutes. If you are not taking this seriously, leave! Thousands of eyes snapped to Izuku. Izuku didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He slowly turned his head to look at Ida. Your assertion is fundamentally flawed on multiple levels, Izuku said. He didn't yell, but his voice carried a precise, chilling resonance that cut through the murmurs of the auditorium. Ida frowned, taken aback. Excuse me? First, regarding my posture, Izuku continued smoothly. I am remaining motionless to conserve metabolic energy and maintain a resting heart rate of 60 beats per minute. A lower baseline heart rate minimizes adrenaline-induced tremors during the practical exam, ensuring maximum kinetic precision. Your shouting, conversely, is expending unnecessary oxygen and spiking your cortisol levels. Ida's mouth opened, but no words came out. Second, regarding the printout, Izuku said, turning his gaze back to Present Mike on the stage. It is not a misprint. It is an intentional test of observation and resource management. The 4th robot is the 0-pointer. An obstacle worth no points, designed solely to act as an environmental hazard. The strategic imperative is to avoid it, not engage it. Izuku paused, letting his emerald eyes sweep the auditorium. This entire exam is structurally biased, Izuku stated, speaking loud enough for the hidden microphones to pick up his voice. It is a straightforward, destructive arena combat scenario. It inherently favors applicants with overt, kinetic or energy projection quirks. It completely disenfranchises those with intelligence gathering, stealth, or psychological quirks. It does not test heroism, it tests property damage. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Even Present Mike stood frozen on stage, his sunglasses slipping slightly down his nose. Izuku turned back to face forward. You may continue your presentation, Present Mike. High above the auditorium, in a darkened observation deck, the faculty of UA watched the monitors. Eraserhead, Aizawa Shota, leaned forward, his bloodshot eyes narrowing at the screen displaying the green-haired boy. Who the hell is that? Sitting at the center console, sipping a cup of high-grade Darjeeling tea, was Principal Nizu. The Stow Dogbear Chimera possessed the quirk High Spec, granting him intelligence far surpassing that of normal humans. Nizu's paws paused on his teacup. He stared at the screen, his dark, beady eyes glittering with intense fascination. He pulled up Izuku's file on his tablet. Izuku Midoriya, Nizu murmured, a wide, almost manic smile spreading across his snout. Quirk none. Quirkless? Scoffed Vlad King. And he just called out the entire structure of the exam? Kid's arrogant. Not arrogant, Nizu corrected quietly. Accurate. He just verbally dismantled our testing methodology in 30 seconds, and he's entirely correct about the bias. I have argued this point with the school board for years. Nizu took a sip of his tea. Let us see if Mr. Midoriya's physical capabilities can match his terrifying intellect. Watch his monitor closely, Aizawa. I have a feeling we are about to witness something unprecedented. Ground Beta was a massive, walled-off replica of an urban metropolis. High-rise buildings, functioning traffic lights, and paved streets formed a sprawling labyrinth. Izuku stood at the front of the pack behind the massive steel gates. Surrounding him were dozens of nervous applicants, stretching, hyping themselves up, and charging their quirks. Ida was doing aggressive lunges. Uraraka was slapping her own cheeks. Izuku stood perfectly still. He closed his eyes. He didn't just hear the hum of the city, he felt it. He was synchronizing his internal clock with the mechanical vibrations of the massive gates. The gate mechanism is hydraulic. I can hear the fluid pressurizing in the primary cylinders. At 4,000 psi, the locking latch will disengage. The auditory cue from present mic will lag behind the mechanical release by approximately 0.7 seconds due to human reaction time and the speed of sound from the speakers. Pressure reaching 3,800. 3,900, 3,950. 4,000. Click. The heavy steel latches disengaged. The gates began to swing open. Izuku didn't wait for the shout. He moved. His brain fired a signal. The SEMG sensors in his undersuit picked it up instantaneously. The pneumatic microactuators along his calves and thighs fired, propelling him forward with explosive, perfectly controlled force. He was a green blur, darting through the opening gap of the gates before they were even fully apart. And Guga! Present Mic's voice boomed from the speakers. What's wrong with you lot? There are no countdowns in real battles. Follow the green kid. The rest of the applicants panicked and surged forward. But Izuku was already gone. He sprinted down the main avenue, his mind mapping the urban layout. He wasn't looking for robots. He was looking for choke points. Machines patrolled based on algorithmic pathfinding. They would naturally converge on main intersections to maximize their line of sight. Izuku rounded a corner and encountered his first targets, 3 one-pointers and 2 two-pointers. They were bulky, green-painted treadbots with massive mechanical arms and glowing red optics. Target acquired, one of the two-pointers synthesized, raising a heavy pneumatic cannon. A normal applicant would have blasted it with fire, or smashed it with super strength. Izuku did neither. He looked at the robots, and he saw lines of code, visual sensors located in the central ocular unit. Locomotion provided by dual continuous tracks. Vulnerability. The tracks rely on a central drive sprocket located at the rear. The armor plating on the chassis is thick, but the articulation joints in the sensory turret are exposed. Izuku didn't break his stride. He engaged the maximum output of his Atlas exoskeleton. He sprinted directly toward the group of robots. The two-pointer fired a tennis ball-sized rubber projectile at his chest. Izuku didn't dodge. Dodging took time. Instead, he raised his left forearm, tilting it at a precise 45-degree angle. The projectile struck his arm, but thanks to the calculated angle and the carbon nanotube weave of his suit, it deflected harmlessly into the sky. The kinetic energy dispersed instantly. Izuku slid beneath the robot's swinging mechanical arm, his sneakers screeching on the asphalt. As he slid under the massive machine, he pulled a small, heavy steel wrench from his pocket, a medical support tool he had declared on his application. He didn't smash the robot. He jammed the wrench precisely into the teeth of the drive sprocket on the robot's left tread. Crunch! The wrench caught in the gears. The left tread seized instantly. The right tread, however, continued to move at full speed. Physics took over. The two-pointer violently spun out of control, its own momentum ripping its internal chassis apart, sending it crashing heavily into a neighboring one-pointer. Both machines went down in a shower of sparks. 3 points. Izuku sprang to his feet, utilizing the momentum of his slide. He leaped onto the chassis of the downed two-pointer, using it as a springboard. The pneumatic actuators in his legs hissed, launching him 4 meters into the air, landing perfectly on the shoulders of the remaining two-pointer. Before the machine's optics could track him, Izuku used his thumb to pry open a small access panel at the base of the robot's neck. He reached in, bypassed the thick power cables, and cleanly yanked out a thin, blue fiber optic wire, the primary telemetry sensor. The robot froze, suddenly blind. Izuku leaped off the machine. Blind, but still operating on its combat algorithm, the two-pointer sensed the heavy vibrations of the 2 remaining one-pointers moving toward it. Recognizing them only as unidentified movement, the blinded two-pointer spun and unleashed a volley of rubber projectiles, obliterating its own allies. 5 points. Izuku hit the ground running. He didn't look back at the wreckage. Total time elapsed, 14 seconds. Points accumulated, 8. Threat level, 0. In the observation room, the faculty was dead silent. Aizawa Shoda was leaning so far forward his nose was almost touching the glass of the monitor. Did he just make them destroy themselves? Vlad King rubbed his eyes. I didn't even see him use a quirk. Did he use a telekinetic pulse? Did he hack them? Neither, Niza whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of joy and sheer awe. He used physics. He used the machine's own mass and programming against it. He identified the drive sprocket's shear tolerance, jammed it with a wedge, and let the robot's kinetic energy destroy its own transmission. Then, he severed the telemetry array of the second, knowing its hostile IFF, identify friend/foe, programming would cause it to fire upon the nearest moving targets. All Might, sitting in his deflated, skeletal form in the corner, chuckled softly. I told you. The boy is different. Different? Snipe muttered. He's a ghost. Look at his movements. There's zero wasted energy. He's not fighting. He's performing surgery on our multi-million yen hardware. On the screen, Izuku was a phantom. He didn't stand and fight. He moved like water through the mock city. When he encountered a three-pointer, a massive bipedal mech, he didn't attack it directly. He calculated the exact radio frequency the UA robots were using to communicate by analyzing the length of their external antennas. He tore an antenna off a down one-pointer, jammed it into the exposed circuitry of a street lamp's power box, and created a localized electromagnetic feedback loop. The three-pointer walked into the EMP field and immediately shut down, its motherboard fried. But Izuku wasn't just destroying robots. Applicant, Yuga Oyama. Quirk, naval laser. Currently pinned down by suppressing fire from 2 three-pointers. He is panicking, firing wildly, reducing his accuracy to 3%. Izuku flanked the robots. He picked up a large piece of shattered mirrored glass from a storefront window. He calculated the angle of Oyama's erratic lasers, the position of the robot's optical sensors, and the refractive index of the glass. Izuku threw the shard of glass into the air like a frisbee. Oyama fired a blind, desperate laser blast. It struck the airborne glass perfectly. The laser refracted, splitting into 2 beams that struck the optical sensors of both three-pointers simultaneously, blinding them and causing them to crash into a building. Oyama gasped, looking around for his savior, but Izuku was already gone. Rescue points, Niza noted, furiously typing on his tablet. He just saved another applicant without even making physical contact, utilizing the applicant's own quirk mathematically. Astounding. The clock ticked down. Izuku's score climbed. 40 points. 52 points. 68 points. He was breathing evenly. His heart rate remained at a steady 75 beats per minute. He was not exerting himself. He was merely solving a very large, very loud puzzle. 2 minutes remaining, President Mike announced over the intercom. In the observation room, Niza's paw hovered over a large, red button. He has mastered the maze, Niza smiled, his sharp teeth glinting in the monitor's light. Let us see how he handles the Minotaur. Niza pressed the button. Ground beta rumbled. It wasn't a minor tremor. It was a massive, seismic event that shook the concrete, shattering the remaining windows in the street. Izuku stopped. He analyzed the vibration. Richter scale equivalent, 4.2. Point of origin, center of the city. Cause, mechanical displacement of massive tonnage. At the end of the long avenue, the buildings parted. Dust and debris exploded into the sky. Rising from the smoke, towering over the 6-story structures, was the zero-pointer. It was a leviathan of steel and hydraulics. Its singular red optic glowed like a malevolent sun. It raised a fist the size of a house and smashed it down onto the street, obliterating a paved road and sending a shockwave of dust and asphalt flying in all directions. The applicants panicked. Run! It's the zero-pointer. It's huge. We can't fight that. The applicants turned and fled in a chaotic stampede. Izuku did not run. He stood in the center of the street, the wind from the robot's impact whipping his green tracksuit. He looked at the Colossus. Mass, approximately 800 metric tons. Height, 45 meters. Composition, hardened steel plating, reinforced hydraulic joints. Weapons, kinetic impact, heavy crushing weight. Conclusion, direct engagement via kinetic force is impossible for a baseline human, even with the Atlas exoskeleton. However, direct engagement is unnecessary. Izuku was about to turn and calmly walk away, having calculated that he had more than enough points to pass, when his auditory processors isolated a sound amidst the chaos. A cry of pain. Izuku's head snapped to the left. 70 meters away, near the base of the zero-pointer, a girl was trapped. It was the gravity girl, Uraraka. Her leg was pinned beneath a massive chunk of concrete debris displaced by the robot's entrance. The zero-pointer's treads were grinding forward, crushing everything in its path. It was 30 seconds away from crushing her. Izuku's heart rate spiked for the first time. Not out of fear, but out of absolute cognitive overdrive. Time to impact, 28 seconds. Distance to target, 70 meters. Option 1, sprint to her location, attempt to lift the debris. Flaw: the debris weighs approximately 4,000 kilograms. Even with Atlas operating at 100% output, I cannot lift it in time before the robot crushes us both. Option 2, distract the robot. Flaw: the robot is programmed to move in a linear path, destroying the environment. It does not possess a complex threat assessment AI. Distraction will fail. Option 3. Izuku's eyes swept the environment, shifting from the robot to the buildings surrounding it. He analyzed the mock city. The buildings were not real skyscrapers. They were hollow, concrete and steel shells built rapidly for the exam. He locked onto a 6-story building directly to the right of the zero-pointer. Building structural integrity, Class 3 mock-up. Load-bearing architecture relies on 4 central reinforced concrete pillars on the ground floor. If the front left and rear left pillars are compromised simultaneously, the building will suffer a catastrophic structural failure and collapse inward, heavily favoring a rightward trajectory. Trajectory calculation: a rightward collapse of a 25-meter structure will place approximately 600 tons of concrete directly onto the cranial unit and upper cervical joints of the zero-pointer. Time to impact, 24 seconds. Izuku engaged the overdrive on the Atlas suit. The micro-actuators screamed, pushing past their safety limits. He didn't run toward Uraraka. He sprinted directly at the 6-story building adjacent to the robot. In the observation room, Aizawa gripped his scarf. What is he doing? He's abandoning the girl? No, Niza breathed, standing up in his chair. He is seeing the board. Izuku reached the ground floor of the building. It was an open-concept lobby with thick concrete pillars. Time to impact, 18 seconds. He ran to the front left pillar. He couldn't just punch it. His hand would shatter. He needed a tool. He scanned the debris on the floor and found a heavy, wedge-shaped piece of reinforced steel plating torn from a destroyed two-pointer. Izuku picked up the steel wedge. He calculated the exact resonant frequency of the concrete and the weakest point in the pillar's structural matrix. He pulled his arm back. The pneumatic actuators in his right arm pumped furiously, building maximum pressure. He slammed the steel wedge into the pillar at a precise 32-degree angle. Crack! The kinetic force of the suit, channeled through the wedge, acted like a shape charge. The concrete shattered, exposing the rebar inside. Izuku delivered a perfectly placed, spinning roundhouse kick, using the titanium strut of his suit's leg, directly to the exposed rebar. The rebar snapped. The front left pillar buckled. Time to impact, 10 seconds. The robot is towering over Uraraka. Izuku sprinted to the rear left pillar, 10 meters away. He didn't have time for the wedge. He needed raw, redirected kinetic energy. He looked at the ceiling. A heavy, steel chandelier hung above the lobby. Izuku leaped into the air, the suit propelling him 5 meters high. He grabbed the chandelier, swinging on it like a pendulum, using his own body weight and the suit's mass to build incredible momentum. At the apex of the swing, he detached, flying horizontally through the air like a missile. He tucked his knees into his chest, exposing the hardened titanium knee pads of the Atlas suit. He struck the rear left pillar with the force of a speeding truck. The impact reverberated through his teeth, but the suit absorbed the skeletal shock. The pillar exploded into dust and gravel. Time to impact, 4 seconds. The building groaned. A terrifying, deep mechanical screech echoed through the air as the remaining 2 pillars failed to support the unbalanced weight. Izuku hit the ground, rolling to dissipate the kinetic energy, and immediately sprinted out the front doors. Timber, Izuku whispered. Above the 0-pointer, the sky darkened. The massive robot looked down at Uraraka, its giant metal foot rising to crush her. Uraraka closed her eyes, screaming. The 6-story building collapsed. It didn't just fall, it folded perfectly, guided by the laws of physics Izuku had violently enforced. 600 tons of concrete, steel, and glass crashed down directly onto the head and shoulders of the 0-pointer. The sound was deafening. The sheer kinetic weight of the collapsing structure crushed the robot's central processing unit, snapped its cervical hydraulics, and drove the Leviathan into the asphalt. The robot's red optic flickered, short-circuited, and died. The massive foot stopped barely 2 meters above Uraraka, frozen in place as the rest of the machine was buried under a mountain of rubble. Silence descended upon ground beta. The dust plumed into the air, slowly drifting in the wind. Izuku walked out of the dust cloud. His breathing was slightly elevated, roughly 110 beats per minute, and the pneumatic actuators on his suit were venting hot steam through the fabric of his tracksuit. But he was otherwise entirely unharmed. He walked over to Uraraka. She was staring up at the crushed mountain of metal and concrete, trembling uncontrollably. Izuku knelt beside her. He examined the debris pinning her leg. He calculated the leverage required. He wedged a long piece of steel pipe under the concrete block, created a fulcrum with a smaller rock, and effortlessly pried the debris off her leg using the suit's strength. He gently lifted her leg, analyzing the bone structure through touch. No compound fractures, Izuku diagnosed clinically. Mild localized swelling indicative of a sprained medial collateral ligament and heavy contusions. You will recover fully with basic first aid and ice. Uraraka stared at him, tears streaming down her face covered in dust. You dropped a building on it. It was the most efficient method of neutralizing a heavily armored target with maximum mass and minimum personal risk, Izuku replied simply, standing up. Time's up. President Mick's voice echoed across the city. The exam was over. Izuku didn't cheer. He didn't celebrate. He mentally powered down the Atlas suit, feeling the heavy exhaustion settle into his natural muscles. He adjusted his backpack, nodded once to Uraraka, and began to walk toward the exit. In the observation room, the faculty was in a state of shock. Aizawa Shota was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He had expected a suicide charge. He had expected a heroic, foolish sacrifice. He had not expected structural engineering and applied physics to instantly decapitate the greatest threat on the field. Rescue points, Nisa said softly, his voice trembling with a mixture of profound respect and something akin to fear. He saved the girl without ever touching the villain. He weaponized our own architecture. What do we score that? Vlad King asked, utterly bewildered. Nisa turned in his chair, his dark eyes gleaming. We score it as infinite, Vlad. He broke the system. And he did it without breaking a sweat. Nisa typed furiously into his console. Izuku Midoriya. Villain points, 74. Rescue points, 60. Nisa smiled, a predatory, joyful grin. Total score, 134. First place by a landslide. All Might watched the screen, his skeletal hands clenched into fists. Pride swelled in his chest, so vast and overwhelming he felt he might cough up blood again. You told me you were building a scalpel, young Midoriya, All Might thought. I didn't realize it would be sharp enough to cut the world in half. 2 weeks later, the letter arrived. Izuku sat at his desk. His computer monitors were running simulations on hero patrol routes, but he paused them. He looked at the thick envelope bearing the UA wax seal. He didn't tear it open nervously. He sliced the top cleanly with a letter opener. A small metal disc fell out onto the desk. It projected a hologram of All Might. I am here as a projection. All Might's booming voice filled the room. The hero went through the motions, explaining the points, the secret rescue points, and the final tally. Izuku Midoriya. You placed first. With a staggering 134 points. You passed, my boy. This is your Hero Academia. The hologram fizzled out. Izuku's expression remained neutral. He had calculated his points to an exact margin of error of 2. He knew he had passed. However, there was a second item in the envelope. A small, high-quality piece of parchment folded neatly at the bottom. Izuku pulled it out. It was written in elegant, cursive handwriting, smelling faintly of Darjeeling tea. Mr. Midoriya, your performance was a masterpiece of tactical efficiency. You have successfully proven that raw power is but one facet of heroics, and perhaps, the least interesting one. I have high expectations for you. Yue has a strict curriculum, but for a mind like yours, I suspect it will be quite boring. Therefore, my office door is always open. I look forward to our chess matches. Principal Nizu. Izuku read the note. For the first time in 10 months, a genuine, albeit small, smile crept onto his face. He folded the note, placed it in his desk drawer, and turned back to his monitors. The first step was complete. He was in the system. Now, it was time to rewrite the code from the inside.